Today we're ready for the last chapter in Nightmare Mountain. It's chapter 13, and the author is Kehret, in case you ever want to look for any of her other books. She's a great adventure mystery writer for kids, and I think you would enjoy her other books too. The hospital bed felt wonderful. It was warm and clean, and best of all, it was safe. At last she could relax knowing that Crane was behind bars. There's some mild frostbite in those fingers and toes, the doctor said, but otherwise you're in remarkably good shape considering what you've been through. We'll keep you here a day or so to rest, and then you should be good as new. I'm starving, Molly said. I'm so hungry, I'm even willing to eat cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and even spinach. Uncle Phil laughed. That won't be necessary. We've already ordered soup for you. How's Glendon? Molly asked. He is suffering from hypothermia, torn ligaments, and a broken arm, the doctor said. They're putting a cast on his arm now, and he'll need to stay here in the hospital for a few days. But he should heal nicely. I foresee no complications. You did a nice job with that splint, by the way. He probably would have needed surgery on his arm if you hadn't held it straight with the spoon. Glendon is lucky to be alive, Uncle Phil said. When the avalanche hit, he covered his head, and that must have created an air pocket big enough for him to survive until you dug him out. Chicken vegetable soup arrived, and Molly thought she had never tasted anything so delicious. She didn't even bother to pick out the peas. While she ate, Uncle Phil told her what had happened, while she and Glendon tried to escape from the avalanche and Crane. Karen hovered between life and death. All night, he said. I stayed with her, of course, and I didn't worry about you and Glendon because I got 2 messages that said Glendon had called and everything at the ranch was fine. How is Aunt Karen now? Better. The crisis is over, thank God, and she'll get well. It wasn't poisoning after all. Your cod liver oil pills had a tamper-proof seal. The manufacturer can tell from a code number on the label, and the lab found no trace of cyanide or any other poison. Well, what was it then? The cookies. My cookies? There was poison in the cookies? The ones I made? Molly was horrified. This was even worse than if the cod liver oil pills had been at fault. Glendon would hate her for sure when he heard this. Not poison, Uncle Phil said. Peanuts. Karen is allergic to peanuts, and she didn't realize there were any in the cookies. She thought she remembered your mom's recipe. There weren't supposed to be peanuts. We didn't have any chocolate chips, so I just used peanut M&Ms instead. Karen couldn't sleep because of her cold, so she got up in the night and made a cup of tea. She decided to have a cookie, too. She said with the raisins and the chocolate, she didn't taste the peanuts right away, and she swallowed some. Apparently, it triggered a severe asthma attack, and she slipped into a coma. Just from eating a few peanuts? An allergy to peanuts is not uncommon, said the doctor. An extreme reaction like this, it's called anaphylactic shock. It is very rare, but it's happened before. Peanut allergy is a strong food allergy. I didn't know she was allergic to peanuts, Molly said. I would never have put them in the cookies if I had known. There was no way for you to know, Uncle Phil said. She got a rash from eating peanuts once when she was a child and hasn't eaten any since. I had at least 6 of those delicious cookies myself, so I should have warned her about the peanuts. I didn't think about her allergy either. Neither of you could have guessed she'd have this kind of reaction, the doctor said, so don't blame yourselves. Just be glad we were able to save her. Molly finished the soup, closed her eyes, and drifted into sleep. When she awoke, her first thought was that the hospital room would make a terrible collage. Everything was white. She wondered if the administration had ever considered painting all the ceilings red or putting plaid blankets on the beds. She realized that Sheriff Donnelly and Uncle Phil were in her room talking. Apparently, their voices had awakened her. She stopped thinking about collages and listened to the conversation. How did you know Crane was stealing my llamas? Uncle Phil asked. What tipped you off? I got a call from Mort Simmons, a new llama breeder over near Glacier. He said someone from Baldwin Llama Ranch brought in 3 llamas yesterday and sold them for less than their value because he needed money. The fellow brought a pregnant llama early yesterday morning and returned late in the afternoon with the other 2. He had registration papers, but Mort wasn't comfortable with Crane's explanation of the background of the llamas. He said he had the feeling that Crane really didn't know much of anything about them. I'm surprised Crane used his real name. Crane showed him an old business card for Baldwin Llama Ranch, one that still had his name on it as a partner. That's what made Mort believe it was a legitimate sale. And he did have the papers for the animals. Uncle Phil slammed his fist into his palm. That rat! He knew I'd keep the registration papers in my file in the barn. All he had to do was match the coloring on the llama to the description on the paper. I don't have any business cards with his name on them, though. I burned those a long time ago. Do you suppose he saved some cards all this time because he planned to do this? Sheriff Donnelly shrugged. Business card or not, Mort still felt uneasy about the deal, so this morning he decided to call and ask a few more questions. When he tried to telephone your place, the line was dead. That's when he notified me. Thank goodness he did, Uncle Phil said. As soon as he said he bought the llamas from Crane, I knew something was wrong, Sheriff Donnelly said. My deputy and I headed out to your ranch right away. We had just turned off the Forest Service road onto your lane when we saw your black truck coming toward us with a llama tied in the back. Crane was driving. Molly shifted in bed, listening. I turned on my sirens and blue lights, but instead of pulling over, Crane made a fast U-turn and started back to the ranch. Why would he do that? The road doesn't go anywhere. He must have known he couldn't escape. Oh, I suspect he's on some drug and not thinking clearly. I don't know. People like Crane who break the law never think they'll get caught, and then when they are, they get desperate. He told me in the car on our way to the jail that he would do anything to keep from being locked up again. Anything. Uncle Phil shook his head sadly. Anything except try to earn an honest living, he said. The saddest part of all this is that Crane wrote to me just before he got out of prison. He asked me to hire him to help him get back on his feet. After what happened before, Sheriff Donnelly said, he must be crazy. He swore that he had learned his lesson. He said he'd get $100 when he was discharged and asked me how far I thought he could get with $100 and no job. Other people make it. If they want to go straight, they can find work. Don't feel guilty for turning him down. I didn't turn him down. I hoped he really had changed, so I offered to let him stay at the ranch with us until he found a job. But he never showed up. After he got out of prison 6 weeks ago, I never heard from him. I thought he must have found a job. Not Crane, the sheriff said. He tried to get rich, quick, by stealing. In the process, he nearly killed my son, your son and your niece. Crane admitted he pushed the bale of hay out of the loft. What was he doing in the loft? And why would he want to hurt Molly? He says he only planned to visit you. He hitchhiked as far as he could and then walked the rest of the way to your place. He got there late at night and didn't want to wake you, so he decided to sleep in the barn. He woke up when the ambulance arrived. He saw you leave. That's when he decided he could make some quick money. He had already seen Merrylegs in the barn, and of course he knew what she was worth. He figured he could take her away, sell her, and return the truck, and you would never know he'd been there. Uncle Phil swore under his breath. He probably intended all along to steal a llama, he said. Why else would he carry a gun and come in the middle of the night? Good question. He put Merrylegs on your truck, parked in the woods until early the next morning, and then drove to Glacier and sold her. Then he brought the truck back and went up in the loft to sleep. He woke up when I arrived to collect the food samples. He thought Glendon had seen him and had called me, so he was furious at Glendon. Later, when he heard someone in the llama pen, he looked down, thought it was Glendon, and shoved the hay over the side. Sheriff Donnelly ran his fingers through his hair. Then he climbed down to see if Glendon was still alive and discovered it was Molly. But why did he bring the truck back? Uncle Phil asked. He had the money from Merrylegs. Why didn't he keep the truck? Or abandon it somewhere? Greed. It was so easy to sell Merrylegs, and he got so much money, he decided to come back for more llamas. I should never have answered his letter, Uncle Phil cried. I certainly should not have told him how well the ranch was doing and offered to let him stay here. All my life I have been giving him another chance, and he always disappoints me. I should have known this wouldn't be any different. even though he gave me that sob story about people on the outside never trusting an ex-con. In his case, he shouldn't be trusted. I know that now. If you had not offered to help him and he ended up in prison again, you'd always blame yourself for not giving him a second chance. Some people do change. Some of them become fine citizens after their release from prison. You had no way to know if Crane was one of them. Sheriff Donnelly turned to Molly. I owe you an apology. I assumed the hay incident was an accident. I should have gone up to the loft and looked. I might have found evidence that Crane had been up there. If I had looked around more, perhaps I could even have found Crane, and that would have saved a lot of trouble. He had a gun, Uncle Phil said. If you had looked for him, we might have had a real tragedy. Why does Crane hate Glendon so much? When Crane lived with us, Uncle Phil said, he was always angry because he said I spent my spare time with Glendon. Crane wanted me to go fishing and play tennis with him, to do all the things we used to do when we were kids. Uncle Phil looked sad. Glendon needed a lot of attention then, and when I tried to give it to him, Crane accused me of spoiling him. We argued about it so often that Crane couldn't stand to have Glendon around. To be honest, I think he was jealous. Glendon was only 4 years old, Molly said. How could a grown man be jealous of a 4-year-old? Crane has always had emotional problems. I hoped he would outgrow them. I thought he would come to his senses and see that he was ruining his life. Unfortunately, he never did. I admit Glendon was extremely difficult during that time, but there were reasons for his behavior, and Crane should have been more tolerant. Glendon's life hasn't always been easy, Molly. There were problems in the past that you don't know all about. You mean Gladys? Uncle Phil looked astonished. He told you about Gladys? Molly nodded. And about how his mom left? He's never talked about that to anyone. I even took him to a child psychologist because I knew he had some fears and resentment that he needed help with, but no one could get through to him. He simply refused to discuss it. Uncle Phil leaned back in the chair, shaking his head. While Crane was with us, Glendon got more and more withdrawn, and even after Crane was gone, the problem didn't get better. If I hadn't met Karen, I don't know what would have happened to him. As it is, it was almost a year after Karen and I got married before Glendon accepted her. I know he loves her now, and he's been much happier the last couple of years. But even with Karen, he refused to talk about Gladys and about my divorce. He's kept it bottled up inside himself all this time. Molly felt honored that Glendon had shared his troubles with her. She knew that it was good for him to talk about Gladys and about how mean his mother had been to him. By talking about it, he could help the pain go away. He could quit dwelling on what happened in the past and put those unhappy years behind him forever. Sheriff Donnelly broke into her thoughts. Mort said, you can come and get the llamas any time, he said. All 4 of them. 4, Uncle Phil said. Did Mary Legs have her baby? A healthy little female, born last night. Now that's good news, Uncle Phil said. Crane was so busy stealing more llamas that he never cashed Mort's check. So there's no money lost, Uncle Phil said. Mom isn't going to believe all of this when I write to her, Molly said. Oh, you won't need to write, Uncle Phil said. She's catching the first plane home. While the doctor was examining you, your mother called because she was worried about Karen. When she heard what happened, she said someone else can introduce the frozen yogurt at the conference. She's going to take care of her almost frozen daughter. Molly grinned and snuggled deeper under the warmth of the blankets. Mom was coming home and everything was going to be all right. I guess that means you'll be going home to Los Angeles sooner than you thought, Sheriff Donnelly said. Maybe not, Uncle Phil said. Molly's mother wants to stay here a while to help out until Karen is on her feet. Good, Molly thought. Maybe Glendon and I can have some fun together yet. Just 2 days ago, she would have said the chances of being friends with Glendon were zip. But now that she knew why Glendon had acted the way he did, she was able to forgive him. Besides, they had something in common now. They had survived an avalanche together. My deputy took Bucky to the vet while I was booking Crane, Sheriff Donnelly said. You might want to know this. The vet says the bullet only made a surface wound. He stitched Bucky up and he'll be ready to go home in the morning. You'd better have a good supply of dog food on hand. He's earned it. Forget the dog food, Uncle Phil said. Bucky deserves his favorite meal, macaroni and cheese. And a medal for bravery, Molly said. And I know a certain girl who was brave too, Uncle Phil said. If it hadn't been for you, we would have lost Glendon. He leaned over the bed and kissed Molly's cheek. And that's the end.